Piling the pressure on Syria, the US president leads mounting international calls for Bashar al-Assad to step down. But will it change the situation on the ground in Syria? And is this the beginning of a coordinated action by the UN? This is Inside Story. Warm welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. The time has come for Syria's leader to step aside. That's what US President Barack Obama believes as he leads a chorus of calls for Syria's leader to go. As well as that, the United Nations says Syria could be guilty of crimes against humanity. It's a significant ramp up of international pressure and the first explicit US call for Bashar al-Assad to resign since the uprising began in March. Rosalind Jordan has more.
A turning point in the international response to the Syrian government's 5 months of violence against its own people. A call from the United States for President Bashar al-Assad to quit.
The time has come for him to step aside and leave this transition to the Syrians themselves.
Along with Clinton's call, an executive order from the president, Barack Obama, with what the administration is calling some of its toughest sanctions yet on Damascus. A freeze on Syrian government assets subject to U.S. jurisdiction, a prohibition on Americans investing in Syria, and a ban on all U.S. imports of Syrian petroleum. U.S. officials say the goal is to starve the Syrian military of the cash it needs to carry out the crackdown. They also admit Syria's broad economic ties with countries such as Russia, China, and India make it harder to isolate the regime, and they're hoping European pressure starts a domino effect.
European economic sanctions will be far more meaningful than American economic sanctions.
Administration officials condemned President Assad for months, but in the wake of the harsh crackdown in the past couple of weeks, notably in the city of Latakia, some critics say President Obama had no choice. But others say the president's call came too little and too late. Now officials say Assad's days in power are numbered, but what if he digs in? The U.S. won't rule out military action, but officials say it's, quote, not a desired course for the U.S. and its allies or for the Syrian people.
We understand the strong desire of the Syrian people that no foreign country should intervene in their struggle, and we respect their wishes.
The U.S. and its allies insist they will make the Assad regime understand that they're serious about the need for political change. But short of resorting to military action, it's not clear just how effective these latest sanctions will be. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, the State Department.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our guests in London. Rosemary Hollis, Professor of Middle East Policy Studies at City University. Ms. Hollis specialises in US, EU and British policy in the Middle East. And in Dubai, we have Ashraf El-Muqdad, a Syrian opposition member. Mr. El-Muqdad has written extensively about the revolution for various publications. I want to welcome both of you to the programme. Rosemary Hollis, I want to start with you. How much of a turning point is this, if we can call it that, and will it ultimately make a difference?
I don't think it's quite a turning point as a progression in the position of the United States and the Europeans. And if they'd avoided this condemnation of Assad much longer, they would have opened themselves to more claims of double standards, because essentially they've been softer on him so far than they were on even Mubarak, let alone Gaddafi.
But why now? What took them so long? We've had 5 months of these protests in Syria that have been met with a brutal crackdown from the security authorities and from the army now. Should they have responded more decisively, perhaps more quickly?
I think we know for a number of reasons why they didn't respond more decisively. One is they simply don't have the assets, the resources, or the inclination to get entangled in Syria on the ground. They don't even want to go as far as they did with Libya, with the air exclusion zone and bombing raids, because the battle lines in Syria are so complex and it's difficult to divide between the regime on the one hand and the ordinary people on the other, because you have divided loyalties in Syria. So it's a question of what's the alternative to Assad? Nobody really knows, and it could be messy. How do you intervene to be useful? Not clear. And is there any inclination in America to intervene directly? No. And as the Syrians have said themselves, it will only complicate their lives if the Americans did intervene directly. So they were deterred by that. But at the same time, they can't keep condemning what Assad's doing and yet tolerating his position. So they've done what they can.
Well, you bring up a number of points there, which I want to get into in a little bit more detail just a little bit later in the discussion. But I want to turn to Ashraf Al-Muqdad for his view on the response that we've gotten from the United States and the international community over the last couple of days. I know as an opposition leader, this is something that you have been calling for some time. Is it long overdue?
Well, it's really a moral stand, which is the United States, and half the word today and yesterday took. I mean, Assad left the international community absolutely no room just to get to this point. The murder, the mass murder, what all the human rights organizations call it crime against humanity, has occurred in Syria. As the professor said, how long the United States and the rest of the world will just condemn what Assad is going. He's not listening to anybody. He's like a raging bull. He's attacking everything moving in Syria, him and his thugs. So it's got to come to this. I mean, the United States have a moral responsibility, and Europe, obviously. And today I'm pleased that Japan had joined in, and yesterday also Canada. So it is an international stand. It's not only the United States, but it has sent a very stern message, and it will show what will follow. So hopefully we're going back to the Security Council, and there is steps to be taken. Also, as I heard in your news, there is a move to go to have an investigative team to go there and investigate the crime against humanity, which is there is a ground, obviously, the UN has found. So yeah, it is very encouraging for the Syrian people. It shows the world standing by their peaceful demonstration, and it shows that they're not alone with this.
Rosemary Hollis, do you fear that this ramped up international response risks having the opposite effect, perhaps backing fire on the international community, in that Assad sees now that he has nowhere else to go, so that he may just step up the crackdown?
Yes, and there you could draw an analogy with Libya, of course. The mounting pressure, including military pressure in the Libyan case, and this demand that the Gaddafi family appear before the International Court has done nothing if not galvanize the determination of Muammar Gaddafi in particular to hang on. And Assad's not the kind of guy that's going to say, oh, okay, game's up, I'm off. He's never really had a good rapport with the United States in any case. I don't think, actually, the American administration, the previous one included the Bush administration, and the Assad regime in Damascus have ever really communicated properly, because we've almost been here before. The Americans had very little time for Syria in the years following 9/11. There was effectively sanctions by the United States in the sense that Syria was blamed by them as a state sponsor of terrorism, and they weren't interested in bartering with the Assad regime over who could do what for whom and how they might cooperate in the region and what Syria would get for cooperation. The Americans have always been pretty tough, pretty hard line with Assad, and this has never inclined him to essentially cave into them. He's rather proud of having stood up to them so far.
Yeah, I mean, let's turn to back to Ashraf on that. I mean, this isn't entirely unfamiliar territory for Bashar al-Assad, as the point that Rosemary Hollis made there. So is this ultimately going to have much of an effect on what he does over the coming weeks and months?
Well, to start with, can I disagree with the professor? Libya, the Muammar Gaddafi have silly money to burn, and he could hire a gunman for 2,000 euro a day. Assad doesn't have this luxury to start with, and then what Gaddafi is doing is buying loyalty for Tripoli and his gangster. But Assad can't have or can't afford this luxury, and he needs way more than what Gaddafi needs to force any, to do what he's doing at the moment. So the comparison is not really working. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Rosemary
Well,
Hollis.
I was just wondering, can we debate this point? Because surely some of the support that Assad is getting is not purely about money. He doesn't only buy support. There are those Syrians who think that they would suffer after the end of Assad because of what they've done in the past. I mean, it's been a very brutal regime, and there will be revenge against those who've been working for it. So isn't that one source of support?
I agree with you. We have, unfortunately, we have some people which have benefited from Assad for a long, long time, and you might even point out for a little bit of sectarian loyalty to Assad. But still, the majority, the major majority in Syria at the moment are in revolt, and Assad now being put under the spot with the international community, we actually thinking, we gamble. I'm betting that somebody in the high up will start splitting soon, because what happened yesterday shows the seriousness of what the international community think of what Assad is doing, and those guys sooner or later are going to think about their future. Assad could go on very well and live in Iran, but he can't take all the people with him. So at the end of the day, what happened yesterday, it's very beneficial for the long run. It's not going to get any worse. Let me put it in this way: Assad cannot murder more numbers than what he's doing at the moment. So it's not going to make it any worse. It will make it, I think, worse to the regime, not for our people.
Let's talk a little bit more about the other major development on the international front on this story, and that is the report we mentioned at the top there that was released Thursday by the UN Human Rights Council. It said Syria's crackdown on protests may amount to crimes against humanity. Let's bring in some of the highlights of that report. It details accounts of widespread and systematic attacks on civilians, including torture and killing of children, and interviews of former soldiers ordered to shoot demonstrators or be shot. It also details the regime's, and we're quoting from the report here, widespread modus operandi to kill civilians by using forces on the ground, snipers on rooftops, and air power, consistent with an apparent shoot-to-kill policy. So pretty damning stuff there, Ashraf al-Muqdad. Does that fit in with the reports that you've been getting from inside Syria, and what kind of impact do you hope that this is going to have?
It's from day one. I don't know if you remember when the day one in my hometown, Dara, which is started the whole thing, and people, the parents, the families of the 15 children which got detained by the security service and got their fingernail being pulled out. When they demonstrated, the snipers were ready, and they shot 4 people at that day, and there's tens of people were injured. So it was systematic from the day one. Those guys, the reports we get, the president brother has started organizing his shabiha, which is the thugs being hired by the security service, from the day the Tunisian uprising has happened. So those guys were ready, were training, where they had the snipers. They already imported the snipers from Iran. We know the numbers where they imported. We got people defected, and they know there's 5,000 snipers which were imported to Syria just after the Tunisia uprising. Then more came from Lebanon later on. So it was systematic. If you see the thousands and thousands of the videos which came out, the dead the people, majority of them being shot in the head, majority of them being shot in the eyes. So it was sniper work. So it was a deliberate act of murder on part of the regime. And there's no question about it. And there's thousands of photos will be shown around the world, and we will be shown to the committee when it comes. I doubt it very much if the committee will have an free access to investigate. I don't think Bashar will ever put it, as the committee before, which came and he refused them entry to Daraa, and I think will be exactly the same. He's not about to hand in all the evidence against him in a silver platter. So we know that the murder. I mean, there's a mass graves all over Hawran, which is my home territory. We know some of it. Some of it we dug out. We show the word. Mate,
Sorry to interrupt. I want to get
sorry.
Rosemary Hollis's take on this. I mean, we were just showing pictures there of some of the protests and the crackdown, the violent crackdown in response to it, which has all been through the result of social media sites like Twitter and Facebook and so on. That's really the only outlet that we've had to find out what's going on inside Syria. But that doesn't seem to have deterred the Syrian authorities at all. I mean, people talked about the Hama massacre that happened in 1982 under Bashar al-Assad's father and have said that something like that could never happen in this age of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and so on. Yet it doesn't seem to have deterred the government so far.
Well, yes, but I think we've learnt that the protesters in all the Arab revolutions or revolts have talked about this passing the fear barrier, and they have shown great bravery in the face of repression. And that's an element in addition to the social media and the capacity of the internet to spread the word globally of the atrocities that are taking place. But that doesn't by itself bring victory, and you do have to have tremendous bravery in the face of this. There are casualties. We saw something similar with those who protested in Iran after the last parliamentary elections, which, I beg your pardon, presidential elections, which they really felt had been stolen, the demonstrators out in the streets, but the regime unleashed both its volunteer forces in plain clothes, essentially the same as the thuggery that you're seeing in Syria, and its own official security forces in uniform, and they beat up the demonstrators. There weren't so many deaths as you're seeing in Syria, but there were as many arrests, and some of the repression of those who are opposing the regime goes on. Now, in the face of this, for the UN to say that these are crimes against humanity, they very probably are. But it's like the Americans condemning Assad and saying he must go, UN condemning his actions and saying they must be held accountable doesn't mean that it'll happen.
Let's talk a little bit more, Rosemary Hollis, about what impact sanctions would have on Syria. I mean, the US sanctions alone may not have much of an impact, but then even when you add the EU sanctions as well, how much of an impact will that really have?
I think the crucial factor here is the isolation of the Assad regime regionally as well as internationally. In other words, he's failed to meet the expectations and the requests of the Saudis and the Turks, who were much more amenable to discussion and negotiation with him than the Americans. And now he's lost their support, lost their patience, as well as Europeans and the United States. He hasn't completely lost the Russians or the Chinese, and that's because they don't like the precedent of interference in sovereign states. So
yeah, I mean, this brings up a question I want to ask you, Rosemary Hollis. Is this, as long as he has, I mean, you mentioned Russia and China, as long as he has other options to go to as far as trade, then he'll just take his business elsewhere, won't he?
He can survive. That's the point. And Mr. Ashraf talked about how he doesn't have the money to keep up the repression. But then, you know, repression just requires some human beings to be brutal to other human beings. And if they feel that it's a zero-sum game, either it's me dead or you dead, then the brutality will continue. So I don't think it will bring him down in terms of squeezing the money supply by itself.
Ashraf al-Muqdad, do you fear that if sanctions do start to bite in Syria, they may have the effect of hurting the Syrian people more than the government?
No, I don't think so, that. I think the Syrian people really want the sanction. Look, let me explain to you about what Shabiha means. Shabiha in Syria, which is by the tens of thousands, they actually getting paid quite a bit of money to carry on to do the dirty job for Assad and his security services. So this money supply has to be diminished somehow. Assad cannot print more money because the lira will crash down, and then whoever is standing up with the regime at the moment to get more benefit will actually leave him. Whatever the results of this sanction will be beneficial to the people of Syria. We doubt that it will work, immediately. Iran is opening a supply of money to Assad, but we think by the time this sanction settled, and it will be harder and harder for Iran to help Bashar. And also remember, the Iraqi government came up now by order of Iran to actually help Assad. So it's not going to be fast, but it will take quite a bit of effect later on, and it's very a moral boost to the Syrian people. So yes.
So where do you think the business elite in Syria fits into all of this? As these sanctions start to bite and the international pressure continues, are they going to be forced to make a choice as to where their loyalties lie?
I think they start making the choice at the moment. If you look at Aleppo, it's the commercial capital of Syria, and Aleppo was quiet for a long time. But if you notice, for the last 2 weeks, Aleppo started coming out, started moving, because they can't be milked as long as this. They never thought this will last that long. They have to pay weekly. The regime were forcing them to pay the Shabiha and pay them weekly. So how long, the pity how long the wallet gonna be? So you could see that last 2 weekends, Aleppo were coming out. The same in Damascus. The very expensive neighborhood start coming out. So yes, he's losing grip on the elite. I'm talking about the money elite, not yet on the military elite.
Rosemary Hollis, the political and business elite in Syria, while they have tacitly supported Assad over the years, they do fear the uncertainty of the aftermath without him, don't they? If he's gone.
I think it's crucial, the point that you're making. The point that you're making here about the merchant elite. For sure, they will have been most directly affected by this decision by the United States and Europeans to part company totally with the regime and impose the sanctions, because that's a signal to them that there is no future with Assad in terms of rehabilitation in the international community and all that means for their businesses. So for them, there was a hope, and I think a number of them actually hoped that Assad could come around. Obviously, Bashar's brother was the one held principally responsible for the security crackdown and the greatest brutality, and there was much speculation as to whether Bashar al-Assad himself was powerless or without direction, not really in charge anymore. And that had already got the merchant elite worried that he couldn't turn the situation around. Now they know that even if he did finally manage to get it together and win by brutality, he will be shunned by the whole of the international community, so it won't do any good.
Ashraf al-Muqdad, just in the minute or so that we have left, what do you think it is ultimately going to take to remove Assad from power? Is it one particular thing inside Syria? Is it a combination of things outside? What is going to be the final tipping point?
Well, we in the opposition, we have like 3 scenarios, which is we're hoping for the best of them. But the best of them really, if there's a split in the elite and the clean hand will do something about Assad and his thugs. We think the possibility is getting bigger and bigger now with international stand. So we're hoping, we are our ears open, our hands actually open to the people inside the elite, military elites, if they want, like, to split out from Assad regime. The other scenario, it's which is more sort of really not what we want at all. Even we are opposition, to actually to arm ourselves, or the Syrian people to arm themselves. The consequences of that really severe aftermath. This
All
is
right. Well, we are going to have to leave it there because we are unfortunately out of time on the discussion. But we will certainly be following events in Syria and how they play out over the next few weeks and months. But for now, I want to thank both of our guests for taking part in the discussion. In London, Rosemary Hollis, and in Dubai, Ashraf El Moqdad. Many thanks for your time. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. You can take part in the conversation anytime, remember, with your comments and suggestions. You can just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. The latest news is up next. Bye for now.